Senate Minority Leader Tom Bakk joins me now to give his analysis of the 2012 session. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's begin at the beginning of session. The mantra of the Senate DFL and really of each caucus was job creation. Do you think the task of creating more jobs was successful this session?
Well, I think what's interesting about it is everyone agreed on that at the beginning. But when we got to the end and someone had to do the lifting to accomplish what we all agreed was going to be our desired outcome, it was Democrats who had to put up the majority of the votes. For both the state bonding bill, which invests in the state's public infrastructure, Democrats had to put up the majority of the votes or it wouldn't have passed. And in the case of the Vikings Stadium, the other, really probably the marquee issue of the session, the issue this session will be remembered for, in the Senate, where the Republicans have 37 votes, they put up 15. It takes 34 to pass a bill. So the Democrats had to guarantee 19 votes out of our 30 in order for it to pass.
So what does that mean? What do you think Minnesotans need to know about the DFL having to step up to move these forward?
Well, I think what's important in the case of the Senate is for 38 years the Democrats have controlled the Senate. And in 2010, the Republicans were swept into power. And last year, when it came time to enact a state budget of this new Republican majority, I would argue they failed pretty badly and took the state into the longest state government shutdown in our country's history in order to get a budget enacted. The outcome of it wasn't very good for Minnesotans. We borrowed a historic amount from our K-12 schools. We got rid of things like the homestead credit that homeowners have enjoyed. We borrowed $750 million from future revenue in the form of the tobacco settlement in order to balance the budget. You know, and this year they come back for what's supposed to be a job session, and we get to the final few days and they didn't have the votes. So after 38 years of it being in the minority, they finally get to the majority, and when it gets to the close of the session, they had to rely on Democrats to finish the work, essentially to take control of the Senate, to pass the two jobs proposals that were in front of us. And
yet the analysis by the GOP in both the House and the Senate is that really, when you come and look at the message is they took the state from a budget deficit to a surplus without raising taxes. Does that message hold any teeth?
Well, I think they're underestimating voters. Both camps, the Republicans and Democrats, have their base of voters. And the majority control of the legislature is determined in a small number of swing districts that have a lot of independent voters in them. And they're pretty savvy voters, and they're going to evaluate the facts of where the state's financial situation is, how well have the Republicans done, and I think they're going to come to the conclusion that they're not being told everything. Our February budget forecast shows a $1.1 billion deficit in the next biennium. If you factor in just nominal inflation, that adds an additional $1 billion. We owe our K-12 schools almost $3 billion. So there you're north of $5 billion. If you assume you're going to pay the schools back, the deficit actually is north of $5 billion that the next legislature is going to face. And if I was to characterize this session in two words, I would say it was one of missed opportunities. I do think there was an opportunity in this session to do significant tax reform, to try and get the state's structural budget problems corrected. They didn't even take a swing at it. And I tried to raise it early on in the session that we had a governor that was willing to look at tax reform, and they just ignored it.
And to that point, the tax bill that was sent to the governor, as a former tax chair, what do you think of the revised bill that ultimately went to the governor?
Well, it increased the deficit by $73 million in the next biennium, and I had a newspaper reporter tell me, "Oh, 73 million, what's that?" You know, well, when you're already facing a $1.1 billion deficit that you have to resolve, adding an additional 73 is real problematic. The governor is either going to have to find $1.1 billion of new revenue for the next budget cycle, or he's going to have to make an additional $1.1 billion in cuts, and we know how hard that is. We saw that last year with the government shutdown, or he's going to have to find some kind of a gimmick to borrow $1 billion, and to add another 73 million to it, that's real money. I mean, $73 million of additional cuts, or 73 million, as a former tax director, I can tell you, to raise $73 million in the tax committee, it's not that easy.
Let's talk real quickly about a couple of bills that were signed and had bipartisan support. They include the HHS bill and K-12, strengthening early literacy and restoring payments to personal care assistants. In your opinion, are these good bills, and did they go far enough?
Well, the Health and Human Service bill, I think, passed the floor of the Senate unanimously, and I think what's interesting about it is it really was a corrections bill based on some of the cuts that they made last year. I think they learned over the interim that some of those cuts were not pretty deep and not fair. So because we had some additional money come in because of the cap on what we allow our nonprofit HMOs to have in profits, we had an additional pot of money that we were able to really undo some of the cuts that were made last year, and there was broad bipartisan support to do that.
What about the K-12 bill? Did you like it?
Well, there's some little incremental things in there on reading and literacy that are helpful, but the changes in staff development is a program that's been around about 20 years. There have been changes in that in the past where we gave school districts additional flexibility over those dollars. So the changes that were made to staff development dollars to school districts are nothing new. That kind of flexibility has been given to school districts in the past.
So my last question for you then, Senator, is near the end of session, we did see some real bipartisan work to get, as you said, the bonding bill passed, the stadium bill passed, and a few other measures as well. Do you see this, not knowing obviously if you're going to be in the majority or the minority next session, but do you think that bipartisan effort can be carried into next session?
Well, I think the Republicans would be smart to be thanking me and thanking Paul Thiessen, the minority leader in the House, because really the best political outcome for us as people in the minority would have been to not put up the majority of votes for the bonding bill, to not put up the majority of the votes for the stadium bill, and say, you know, you're in charge, you're in the majority, it's your job to lead. We could have easily taken a minority position like that, and we wouldn't have gotten a bonding bill, we wouldn't have gotten a stadium bill, and I think we could have went out on the campaign trail, and I think virtually everybody would have agreed that this would have been the largest do-nothing session in our state's history. But we came to the end of the session and decided, even though that might be the best political outcome, it wasn't the best outcome for our state. So I would argue in those last 2 weeks, you saw Democrats take control of the legislature, even though they were in the minority, to work with the governor to get a couple of accomplishments out of what would have otherwise been a total do-nothing session.
Okay, Senate Minority Leader Tom Bakk, thank you for coming in and talking about the session. We appreciate it.
Thank you.